I found a savings account with $412,000 in a handwritten note tucked inside an old coffee tin, and the person who left it there, the last person I ever expected. Let me take you back to where this all started. My name is Eugene. I'm 63 years old, retired, and for most of my adult life I worked as a maintenance supervisor at a middle school in Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous work. Not the kind of job that gets you on magazine covers. But I showed up every single day for 31 years, and I was proud of that. I fixed what was broken. I kept things running, that's what I do. My wife Carol passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. We had 27 years together, and I won't pretend the last 8 have been easy without her. But I had my house, my small savings, my garden in the backyard, and my son. My son, Terrell, is 34. When he was young, he was the kind of kid who'd make you tear up at a school play. Sensitive. Thoughtful. He wrote me a card every Father's Day until he was well into his 20s. After Carol passed, he'd call me every Sunday evening. Every single Sunday. I held on to those calls like a lifeline. Then he met Stacy. I want to be fair. I want to be the kind of person who sees the good in everyone. And Stacy, she wasn't a bad person, not at first. She was sharp, ambitious, always moving fast, always talking about what was next. She worked in real estate, made good money, had opinions about everything. When Terrell brought her home for Thanksgiving the year after they started dating, she sat at my kitchen table and looked around the way people look at something they're already planning to redecorate. I noticed, but I told myself I was being a paranoid old man. They got married 2 years later. I paid for a good chunk of the wedding because Terrell asked me to and because I wanted to. That's what you do. Carol would have wanted that. They moved into a rental apartment in the suburbs, and for a while things were fine. Sunday calls became every other Sunday, then once a month. Then I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. About 3 years into their marriage, Terrell lost his job. He'd been working in logistics management and the company downsized. He was out of work for 7 months. During that time, Stacy's attitude toward me shifted in ways I couldn't quite name at first. She started dropping comments. Not mean, exactly, just pointed. "Dad, have you ever thought about downsizing?" she asked me one afternoon, right there in my living room, looking at the framed photos of Carol on the mantel. "I'm fine where I am," I said. "It's a lot of house for one person. The market's incredible right now. You could walk away with serious equity." Terrell didn't say anything. He was sitting on the couch looking at his phone. I changed the subject. But that was the first stone, the first little pebble dropped into still water. Over the next year and a half, Stacy found a new job. A big promotion at a development firm. Terrell found work again. A step down from where he'd been, but steady. And something about that period shifted the balance in their marriage in ways I could see but couldn't say out loud without sounding like a bitter old man. She made more money, a lot more money. And she started making more decisions. They bought a house, I'll admit, 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a yard with a cedar deck. They moved into their neighborhood and immediately seemed to need more. I don't know exactly when Stacy decided that my house should be part of their plan, but I know it happened gradually, the way water wears down rock, so slowly you don't notice until the damage is already done. It started with Terrell calling me, actually calling, for the first time in months to talk about options. He'd been talking to a financial advisor, he said, and with the Columbus market the way it was, my house could sell for somewhere around $380,000. After expenses and fees, I'd clear close to $340,000. He'd thought about it carefully, he said. I could move into a senior living community, a nice one, not a depressing one, and have money in the bank and not have to worry about maintenance anymore. I sat with the phone against my ear and looked around my kitchen, the tile Carol and I had picked out together. The window over the sink where she used to stand and watch the birds. The backyard where I'd planted the rose bushes the year she got sick, because she'd always wanted rose bushes and we'd never gotten around to it. "I'm not selling my house," I said. "Dad, I'm not selling my house, Terrell." Long pause. Then, "Okay, Dad, I understand." But it didn't end there. It never ends there. Over the next several months, I found out, through a neighbor who meant well and didn't realize what she was telling me, that Stacy had already been in contact with a real estate agent, that she had talked to at least 2 people in my neighborhood about the likely trajectory of property values on my street, that she had pulled the public records on my house to check whether there were any liens, any outstanding taxes, anything that could complicate a sale. My house. She had researched my house without my knowledge, without my permission, without a single conversation. When I confronted Terrell about it, he got defensive, said Stacy was just gathering information, said I was overreacting, said he was worried about me living alone. And that was all this was about. If you were worried about me, I said, you would call on Sundays. He didn't have an answer for that. I went to bed that night and lay in the dark for a long time. Carol used to say I had a tendency to absorb things quietly for too long, let people push on me because I didn't want conflict, and then one day just go very still in a way that meant I was done. She knew me better than I knew myself. I think that night was the night I went still. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't cut anyone off. I just made some decisions and kept them to myself. The first thing I did was call my attorney, a woman I'd used for Carol's estate, a no-nonsense woman named Phyllis who'd been practicing in Columbus for 30 years. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Eugene, the good news is your name is on that deed and yours alone. Nobody can force you to sell anything, but let's make sure everything is properly structured so there are no surprises down the road." We updated my will. We set up a clear power of attorney with a different family member, my younger sister, who lives in Cincinnati and who I trust completely. We documented everything. Then I made a second call to my financial advisor, a man I'd worked with for 15 years who had helped me manage the modest savings I'd accumulated over 3 decades of careful living. I told him I wanted to restructure certain accounts and make sure my assets were fully protected and clearly titled. He asked me if everything was okay. "I'm being proactive," I said. He knew what that meant. We'd worked together long enough. What most people don't know about me, what Stacy certainly didn't know, is that over the course of my career, I had been methodical about money in the way that people who grow up without it tend to be. I didn't make a large salary, but I never carried credit card debt. I bought my house in 1994 and paid it off in 2011. I maxed out my retirement contributions every year that I could. I bought a small piece of land outside the city, just 3 acres, nothing fancy, when prices were low, and I held on to it for 20 years before selling it 4 years ago for considerably more than I paid. I was not wealthy, but I was more secure than I appeared, and I had kept it quiet the way Carol always said I should, because she understood, better than I did, that money changes how people see you. Stacy had no idea. Things escalated in November. Terrell came to my house on a Saturday afternoon while I was raking leaves. He sat on the porch steps and watched me for a while, and then he said, "Dad, I need to talk to you about something serious." I leaned the rake against the fence and sat down beside him. He told me, and I could tell he'd rehearsed this, that the words were not entirely his own, that he and Stacy were concerned about my cognitive health, that I'd seemed confused during some of our recent conversations, that they were worried I wasn't in a position to make good decisions about my finances or my living situation, that they had spoken to a doctor, not my doctor, a doctor of their choosing, about the possibility of getting an evaluation done. I looked at my son, the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car trips. The boy who cried at every school play and tried to hide it. I looked at him sitting on my porch talking about my cognitive health, and I understood exactly what was happening. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent. "Terrell," I said very quietly, "do you actually believe that? Or are you saying what you've been told to say?" He looked away. And that look, just that one small flicker of his eyes away from mine, told me everything I needed to know. He didn't believe it. He was a man caught between two things he wanted, and he had chosen the wrong one. I stood up. I picked up my rake. "You should go home," I said. "Dad, go home, Terrell. I love you. Go home." He left, and I raked leaves in the cold November air until the yard was clean. And then I sat on the porch alone as it got dark and thought about Carol and how much I wished she were there. I called Phyllis on Monday morning. I told her about the conversation. She was quiet for a moment, and then she told me to write down exactly what was said, date it, and send it to her. She also told me to go see my own doctor that week and get a full evaluation, not because anything was wrong, but have documentation. I did. My doctor, who has known me for 19 years, ran every test she had. Afterward, she sat across from me and said, "Eugene, you are one of the sharpest 63-year-olds I've seen in this practice. Whatever this is about, it isn't your cognition." I kept that report. I gave a copy to Phyllis. I kept one in my files. December came. I didn't hear from Terrell. No call on Thanksgiving. No visit. I cooked for myself, ate at my own kitchen table, and called my sister in Cincinnati. She drove up and spent the holiday weekend with me, and we talked, and she cried a little, and I told her I was okay. A week before Christmas, a certified letter arrived at my house. It was from an attorney, not Phyllis, a different attorney, representing Terrell and Stacy. The letter stated that they had concerns about my well-being and my capacity to manage my own affairs, and that they were pursuing a formal guardianship petition with the Franklin County Probate Court. I read it twice. Then I set it on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of coffee. I won't tell you I wasn't scared. I was. Guardianship proceedings are serious. If successful, they strip you of your legal independence. You lose the right to make decisions about your own money, your own home, your own life. It happens to elderly people more than most people realize, and it can happen quickly. But I had Phyllis. I had my doctor's report. I had every document in order. And I had something else, something I hadn't told anyone about yet. 3 years earlier, after I sold the piece of land outside the city, I had done something that felt a little excessive at the time, but that Carol would have approved of. I'd put $412,000 into a high-yield savings account in my name only, at a credit union in a different county, with my sister listed as the only other authorized contact. Not a joint account, not linked to anything Terrell or Stacy could access or see, titled cleanly, documented thoroughly, completely private. I had also been keeping something else, a journal, not a dramatic journal, not a therapy journal, just a plain notebook where I wrote down conversations, dates, things that was said. I'd started it the day Stacy first asked me about downsizing. Something in me that day said, write it down. And I had for 2 years. When Phyllis filed our response to the guardianship petition, she submitted my doctor's report, the journal, the timeline of documented conversations, the certified letter, all of it. She also filed a complaint with the Ohio State Bar Association regarding the conduct of the opposing attorney, who had signed the petition containing claims that were demonstrably false. The hearing was in February. I sat at a table in a courtroom in Columbus, Ohio, 63 years old, in the same suit I wore to Carol's funeral because it's the one that fits me best, and I listened while Phyllis laid out everything systematically and clearly. Stacy's attorney tried to paint a picture of a confused, isolated old man who needed supervision. Phyllis presented 2 years of documentation that said otherwise. The judge dismissed the petition. Afterward, in the hallway, I saw Terrell standing near the elevator. Stacy wasn't with him. He looked at me the way he used to look as a boy when he knew he'd done something he couldn't undo. Older, smaller somehow. Tired. I walked over to him. "Dad," he started. "I know," I said. "I know," I said. "I know, I'm sorry. I know that too." We stood there in that courthouse hallway for a long moment. I'm not going to tell you we hugged and everything was fixed right there. It wasn't. Damage like that doesn't wash off in a moment. But I'm also not going to tell you I walked away without hope, because I didn't. He's still my son. That doesn't change. What happened next came about 3 weeks later, and I still think about it every time I'm in the kitchen. My sister came to visit. We'd been closer than ever since all of this started, and she'd been up to Columbus a few times to check on me. That Saturday morning, she was helping me clean out the hall closet. We were donating some of Carol's old things that I'd finally found the peace to let go of, and she kept coming across boxes and bins she'd set aside. At one point, she carried out an old metal coffee tin from the back shelf, one of those large decorative holiday tins, red with green holly on it. It had been sitting back there for years, shoved behind winter coats and a broken umbrella. "What's this?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. It was Carol's. We opened it together at the kitchen table. Inside, there was no coffee. There were papers, folded carefully. A passbook from a credit union I didn't recognize, with a savings account in Carol's name, showing a balance of $412,000. And on top of the papers, a handwritten note, Carol's handwriting. I'd have known it anywhere, Eugene. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've probably been running the house by yourself for too long already, and driving yourself crazy worrying about money when you don't need to. This account has been building since 1998, a little from every paycheck every year. I knew you'd argue with me about it if I told you, so I didn't. It's in my name, so you can't do anything stubborn with it before you need to. You have always taken care of everyone else. I wanted to make sure someone took care of you. Don't you dare stay in that house alone and be miserable. But don't let anyone push you out of it either. I love you." Carol, my sister, had to leave the room. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, reading Carol's note over and over. In the house we bought together in 1994, in the kitchen with the tile we picked out together, by the window where she used to watch the birds. There are things in life that you don't know how to carry, and then one day you find out you weren't carrying them alone. I transferred the account into my name. I updated my estate documents. I kept the note. It lives in my nightstand drawer, and I've read it probably 100 times since that morning. As for Terrell, we've been talking, carefully, slowly, with a lot of quiet in between words. I don't know what his marriage looks like now from the inside. I don't ask. What I know is that he called me on a Sunday evening, about 6 weeks after the courthouse, and then the following Sunday and the one after that. We don't talk long, but we talk. Stacy hasn't called. I don't expect she will. I spend my mornings in the garden now when the weather allows. The rose bushes I planted for Carol are coming up again this spring, the same as they do every year. My sister visits once a month. I have neighbors I like and a doctor who knows my name, and a church I've been going to for 20 years. I am not a wealthy man, but I am secure and I am standing in my own house, and no one pushed me out of it. There was a moment, standing in that courthouse hallway, when I asked myself how I'd gotten there. How a man can do everything right for 60 years, work hard, stay out of debt, take care of his family, love his wife, and still end up having to fight for the right to live in his own home. I don't have a clean answer. What I have is this. I kept my records. I stayed quiet when I needed to, and spoke when I had to. I trusted the people who had earned it. Carol always said I was stubborn. She meant it as a compliment. She was right. If you've ever had someone believe in you when you didn't know they were watching, when you couldn't see it yet, then you already understand what I found in that coffee tin. Not just money. Not just a document. Evidence that someone who loved you was paying attention all along. I'm Eugene. I'm 63 years old, and I'm still in my house. And that, for right now, is enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with all of this, not analyze it, not pick it apart the way I might have when I was younger and angrier. Just sit with it. And what I keep coming back to is something pretty simple, the way you treat people in quiet moments. Not the big dramatic ones, but the ordinary Tuesday afternoon moments when nobody's watching. That's the thing that follows you. Stacy thought she was being strategic, and in a certain kind of way, she was. She gathered information, she built a case, she moved methodically. But what she didn't account for was that I had been moving methodically for 30 years before she ever walked through my front door. Not because I suspected her specifically, because Carol taught me to, because growing up without much taught me to, because I understood, in a way that doesn't require a business degree to understand, that the only real protection you ever have is the foundation you built before the storm came, Terrell. And I say this as his father, which means I say it with grief as much as anything else. Terrell made a choice. He made it slowly, over years, in 100 small surrenders. That's usually how it goes. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to betray the person who raised them. It happens in increments, each one small enough to justify, until one day you're sitting across a courtroom from your father, and you can't quite look him in the eye. I don't believe he's a bad person. I believe he got lost. I believe he chose comfort over conscience for long enough that he forgot he'd made a choice at all. And I have to believe that the part of him that looked away in that hallway is the part that still knows the difference. What I learned from all of this, what I earned the hard way, is that integrity is only partly about what you do when it matters. It's mostly about what you do before it matters. I kept records because something in my gut said to. I structured my accounts because Phyllis told me to, and I trusted her. I stayed quiet and didn't escalate and didn't threaten because Carol always said that the loudest person in a dispute rarely wins it. Every one of those decisions felt small at the time. Together, they were the difference between losing everything and walking out of a courthouse with my life intact. And then there's Carol. I think about what she did, quietly, over decades, without a word, and I don't have a clean way to describe what that means to me. She knew I would argue. She knew I would say we didn't need a separate account, that I had things handled, that she was worrying over nothing. So she didn't ask. She just did it. She paid attention to who I was and built something around my blind spots. That's not luck. That's love that actually did the work. I'm 63. I'm still in my house. The rose bushes are coming up again. And every morning when I make my coffee, I think about what it means to live in a way that you don't have to be ashamed of, not for anyone else's sake, but for your own. That's the only standard that holds.